Hi, I'm Stumpy Nubs, and this is how I improved my jointer and planer. A lot of new woodworkers wonder if they need a power jointer or a power planer or both. So before we get started, let's answer that question. To make furniture or any sort of fine woodworking, you have to have straight, flat, and square stock. You can get away for a while with pre-surfaced stock from a home center, but it's pretty hard to find boards that are truly flat, and once they acclimate to your shop, they may still cup or bow or twist a little bit. That has to be corrected, or it can seriously affect the quality of your work. The way modern woodworkers get their boards flat, straight, and square is with a power planer and a power jointer. A jointer will make one surface flat and straight, and one edge straight and squared to that flat surface. Then the planer makes the second surface parallel to your straight and flat surface, and therefore straight and flat itself. The planer also changes the thickness of your boards and makes it nice and smooth. The two are not the same. They're designed to work together. A planer will not make a bowed board straight, and a jointer will not make two surfaces parallel to each other, and you can't use it to thickness your material. There are some exceptions. You can make a sled that will enable a planer to flatten short pieces. So for that reason, I suggest buying a planer first if your budget is tight. But if you do a lot of woodworking, and especially if you want to use less expensive rough-sawn hardwoods, you're going to want a joiner and a planer eventually. Now let's look at ways to improve their performance so that they will give you the most bang for your buck. We'll start with the stand. A lot of people put their jointers in one place and their planers in another, maybe on a cart or under a bench or something. I prefer to have both machines literally on top of each other because they're almost always used together. I also like to have my planer up where I don't have to bend over to use it. So I built a stand that bounced the planer on top of the jointer, as if they're one machine. I started with a couple of 2x10s. I would have preferred 2x12s, but the 2x10s at my local home center looked a lot better, so I went with them. I measured the height of my jointer from the floor to the top of the fence. That's where my first shelf will go. I used pocket screws because I want this to be a fast project and they're plenty strong. You can use whatever sort of joinery you like. I'm making two shelves on this stand because I want to get as much use out of my floor space as possible, so I'm going to add a third tool to my machine stack. I made the whole thing about 3 feet wide. It could have been narrower, as long as the base of my jointer would fit between the legs. But the longer it is, the more outfeed support I'm going to have for my planer after I'm finished. After the frame was built, I cut some pieces of plywood to make the two shelves wide enough to accommodate the tools that I was going to put on it. I'm putting the planer on top. Now that might seem a little high, but the important thing is that you can reach up to turn the crank on top. If you can do that, you're fine. Besides, it gives me enough room to put a second tool beneath the planer. If you're a short guy, you can just skip that center shelf and bring your jointer right down to waist level if you like. I tacked on some trim to pretty it up a bit and a couple of boards set to the same height as my infeed and outfeed tables to give me some extra work support when I'm using the planer. The jointer slides beneath just up to the fence, so you can still edge joint wide boards. This setup really works well because I can run a board over the jointer and then go right up to the planer on top. Easy peasy. Now let's talk about a few simple ways you can improve the performance of your machines. We'll begin with the planer. Every once in a while, you should pop off the sides and check everything out. Make sure the belt is secure, blow out any caked in dust, and lubricate everything. If a machine has sat unused for a long time and the screws or something has seized up, I like to apply some PB penetrating lubricant. I let it sit overnight and then I apply more as needed. Don't force a rusted bolt or something that will break. It's all about patience. I had to apply it a couple of times and then let it sit overnight to remove the screws that held on my side panels. Everything else gets lubricated with some lithium grease spray. This stuff doesn't attract dust and it lasts a long time. Don't use WD-40 or machine oil on anything that may be exposed to dust. You're just going to have a mess. If your feed rollers are slipping during use, they need to be cleaned. If you're playing a lot of pine, this is going to be a regular thing because that stuff really does a number on your rollers. I clean them with naphtha because it cuts the crud well, but it won't damage the rubber. Unfortunately, the rollers don't spin when the planer is off, so you can only clean about 1/3 of the surface at a time. As tempting as it may be to turn the thing on and hold the rag against the spinning rollers, don't be stupid. Just wipe what you can, then pull your hand out, run the planer for a second to rotate the rollers to a different position, wipe and repeat until both rollers are clean all the way around. I also use naphtha to clean off the tables. After it's dry, I apply a thin coat of paste wax. Once you get that buffed, your planer will suck wood in and spit it out a lot better. Changing the knives on most planers is pretty easy because they're usually made with indexing pins. The downside is that this doesn't give you much room for sharpening before your knives are too narrow to use anymore because you can't reposition them. Really, planer knives are just meant to be thrown away. Fortunately, we live in the internet age where we can order generic knives for almost any planer for way cheaper than the stock versions. Put a set of those in and do these other things and you'll think you have a new tool. Another important improvement you can make on a planer is the addition of a digital scale. These cost about $60 and they're easy to install on almost all planer models. They will improve your accuracy and make your settings easily repeatable, which is the best part. Let me tell you, that sure beats counting turns of the crank. Let's move on to the jointer. Changing jointer knives are a much more difficult process because they rarely have indexing pins. That's because jointer knives are made to be sharpened many times, and they have to be advanced up or down in the slot to compensate as sharpenings make them narrower. The trick, though, is to get all three on the exact same plane when you reinstall them. You don't want just one knife doing all the cutting. I like to use a jig like this one from Rockler. I'll put a link to it below the video. It has a set of magnets on the underside that hold the edge of your knives on the same plane as the outfeed table as you install them. No matter how you do it though, you're not going to want to do this very often because jointer knives are just a pain in just about every machine, especially older ones. Every once in a while, you should check to make sure both the infeed and the outfeed table of your jointer are parallel to each other. You can check by raising the infeed table to the same level as the outfeed and laying a straight edge across them. If one of the tables is sagging at the end, you're going to have to shim it, a process that is different with each machine, but instructions can usually be found in your manual or online. Keeping them parallel is very important for the machine's performance. If you're getting indentations at the end of your workpiece after you pass it across the jointer, that's called snipe. It means your outfeed table is probably set lower than your knives. Use a straight edge to raise the table to the same height as the knives when they're at their apex, and that should eliminate the problem. Finally, I like to clean the table of my jointer and the fence with a naphtha and apply some paste wax just as we did with the planer. That makes a big difference in the effort that it takes to pass lumber across the top. Not every woodworker needs a jointer and planer. I got along without one for a long time, but once you have them, and if you keep them tuned up and working well together, you wonder how you ever got along without them. Be sure to subscribe to Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal for more woodworking goodness, and we'll see you next time.